There is a moment that arrives differently for everyone, but that every person who has been through it describes in almost the same way. A moment when something that was blurry becomes clear, when something that was felt but unnamed finally has a shape, when the experience you have been living, the restlessness, the shifting, the sense that something was changing, suddenly makes sense, not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough to know that what has been happening to you was not a malfunction, was not a breakdown, was not something going wrong, was something going right, for the first time in a long time, maybe for the first time ever. And along with that clarity comes something unexpected, not just relief, not just understanding, a quality of recognition, the feeling of having been seen, not by another person, by yourself, by the part of you that has been trying to get your attention for longer than you have been willing to admit. That part is still there. It has always been there. And tonight, we look directly at what it has been trying to show you. Let us talk about what seeing actually means. Not in the ordinary sense, not the seeing of the physical eyes, something more specific than that. The ancient traditions had a word for this quality of perception. The Greeks called it theoria, usually translated as theory, but in its original meaning, something far more direct than theory. Theoria was the direct seeing of what is real, not the intellectual understanding of it, not the conceptual grasp of it, the actual, immediate, unmediated perception of it. The kind of seeing that changes the seer, not because new information has been acquired, because something has been directly encountered that cannot be unseen. The difference between knowing about fire and having your hand in it. The difference between understanding. That consciousness is deeper than personality. And actually perceiving that depth for yourself, in your own experience, right now. This is the seeing that the ancient traditions spent thousands of years developing technologies for. Not the seeing of the eyes, the seeing of the awareness behind the eyes, the seeing that perceives not just what is in front of you, but what is looking. Now, I want to say something about the specific quality of what you are beginning to see, because it is easy, in this culture, to mistake the beginning of genuine seeing for the achievement of a final answer, to mistake the first clarity for the complete picture, to take the initial recognition, the sense that something is finally making sense, and build a new fixed identity around it, the identity of someone who has awakened, who has figured it out, who now sees what others cannot see. And this, the contemplative traditions warn us, is one of the most subtle and most common obstacles on the path of genuine inner development. The Zen tradition calls it the stink of enlightenment, the moment when the first genuine glimpse of something real becomes the foundation of a new performance, a new way of being special, a new story about being different. From the people who have not yet seen what you have seen, the genuine seeing, the theoria that the ancient Greeks pointed at, does not produce superiority. It produces humility, not the performed humility of someone trying to appear unattached, the genuine humility of someone who has seen enough to understand how much they have not yet seen, of someone who has glimpsed the depth and recognized that the glimpse, however real, is not the depth itself. The 14th century Flemish mystic Jan van Ruysbroek described the genuine spiritual life as a river that flows in two directions simultaneously: outward into engagement with the world, and inward into deeper and deeper encounter with the source, not one or the other, both, always both. The person who is genuinely seeing does not withdraw from ordinary life, does not separate themselves from the people around them. On the basis of their seeing, they bring the seeing into the ordinary. They let it change how they are present. In the kitchen, at the dinner table, in the difficult conversation, in the moment of frustration or loneliness, or ordinary human imperfection. They let the seeing make them more human, not less, more present, not more distant, more compassionate, not more certain, because what genuine seeing reveals is not a set of answers that separates the awakened from the asleep. It reveals a quality of awareness. That is the same in every human being. That has always been the same. That was never less present in the person who has not yet seen than in the person who has. The difference is not in the awareness. It is in the recognition of the awareness. And recognition, by its very nature, cannot be a possession, cannot be held over others, cannot be the basis of a new hierarchy, because what is recognized is common to all, is the ground of all, is what every human being is made of, equally, without exception, without gradation. Bloco 3, desenvolvimento 2. There is something that happens when the seeing becomes real, when the recognition is not just intellectual, but lived, felt in the body, present in the ordinary moments, not just the extraordinary ones. Something shifts in how you relate to everything that used to feel urgent. The things that used to keep you up at night still exist. The difficulties are still difficult. The uncertainties are still uncertain. But there is something different in how they land. Something that was not there before. A quality of space. A sense that whatever is happening within something larger than itself. Within an awareness that is not threatened by what moves through it. The ancient traditions describe this quality with different words in different languages, but the description is consistent. The Stoics called it apatheia, not indifference, not the absence of feeling, something more precise, the quality of a consciousness that can be fully present with difficulty, without being consumed by it, that can feel the grief, without becoming the grief, that can hold the fear, without being held by it. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the most powerful empire in the world, while simultaneously practicing this discipline, wrote about it with remarkable honesty. He described moments of genuine difficulty, moments of loss and frustration, and the particular heaviness of carrying enormous responsibility. And he wrote about the practice, not of escaping those moments, but of remaining present within them, of allowing the difficulty to be exactly what it was, without the additional suffering of wishing it were otherwise. This is not a passive teaching. It requires more of you than the ordinary strategies of avoidance. It requires the willingness to be genuinely present with what is genuinely difficult, without the cushion of distraction, without the escape of spiritual bypassing, without the comfort of a framework. That makes the difficulty mean something elevated, before it has been fully felt. The Buddhist tradition called this quality equanimity. Again, not indifference, not the flatness of someone who has stopped caring, the stability of someone who cares deeply and is not destabilized by that caring, who loves without the love becoming a form of possession, who engages without the engagement becoming a form of grasping, who is fully here without needing here to be different from what it is. This quality does not arrive all at once. It deepens slowly in the ordinary moments, in the moments when the old patterns still try to reassert themselves, and something in you catches them, not from a place of judgment, from a place of recognition. Oh, there it is again. The familiar contraction, the familiar reaching, the familiar story about what needs to happen for everything to be okay, and the catching, that simple act of noticing without immediately being swept away, is itself the practice, is itself the deepening of the seeing, is itself the evidence that something real has changed now. I want to talk about relationships because one of the clearest places where a seeing either deepens or stalls is in how you relate to other people, and specifically in how you handle the gap between what you are beginning to see and what the people around you are not yet seeing, or not seeing in the same way. This gap is real, and it creates a specific kind of loneliness. That is different from ordinary loneliness. It is the loneliness of having a language that the people closest to you do not yet speak, of caring deeply about questions that the people you love have not yet started asking, and the temptation in the face of this gap is one of two things: either to close it by retreating back into the familiar, by pretending the seeing has not happened, by making yourself smaller so that the gap disappears, or to widen it, to separate yourself from the people who have not yet seen, to create an identity around the seeing. That puts distance between you and them. Both of these, the ancient traditions understood as errors, as ways of misusing what has been given. The genuine response to the gap is neither retreat nor separation. It is presence, the willingness to be fully present with the people who are exactly where they are, without needing them to be further along, without making your own development into a standard against which they are measured and found wanting, because the awareness you are beginning to recognize in yourself is the same awareness that is present in them, even if they are not yet recognizing it. The recognition of your own depth is not evidence of your superiority. It is evidence of the depth that every human being carries. And the most honest response to that recognition is not to hold it over others, but to let it make you more patient, more gentle, more willing to meet people where they actually are. There is a story from the Zen tradition that I want to share here. A young monk came to his teacher, excited by a breakthrough he had experienced in meditation. He described a quality of clarity that had arrived, a sense of profound spaciousness, a feeling of being in contact with something deeper than his ordinary self. And the teacher listened carefully and then asked a single question: "How are you with the cook?" The monk was confused. What does the cook have to do with this? The teacher looked at him steadily. Everything. The cook was someone the monk found difficult, someone whose manner irritated him, whose presence contracted something in him, whose ordinariness, the noise in the kitchen, the smell of the food, the entirely unremarkable quality of just being a person doing a job, felt somehow beneath the spiritual work the monk was engaged in. And the teacher understood something, that the monk had not yet understood. That the quality of the seeing is not measured in the depth of the meditation. It is measured in how you are with the cook, with the difficult colleague, with the family member who does not understand you, with the person in the street who has no idea what you are going through, and whose ordinary human presence either irritates or moves you, depending on the quality of attention you bring to them. This is the real test of the seeing, not the peak experience, not the moment of clarity, how you are in the ordinary, how present you are, when presence is not particularly rewarded, when no one is watching, when the cook is just the cook, and life is just life, and the seeing, if it is genuine, is right here. In this, always, there is a specific challenge that arrives when the seeing deepens, one that the ancient traditions described with great care because it is subtle enough to look like progress while actually being a form of stagnation. The challenge is this: the seeing can become a new way of avoiding what still needs to be faced. When genuine recognition arrives, when the awareness behind the personality becomes briefly visible, there is a quality of peace that comes with it, a sense of spaciousness, a reduction in the grip of the ordinary anxieties. And this is real, this is genuine. But there is a shadow side to this peace. The peace can become, if we are not or careful, a spiritual bypass, a way of using the recognition of the deeper self to avoid the unresolved material of the ordinary human life, to say, I am the awareness beneath all of this, as a way of not having to deal with all of this, to use the language of non-attachment as a way of avoiding genuine intimacy, to speak of the dissolution of the ego as a way of avoiding the difficult work of actually examining what the ego contains. The psychologist John Wellwood, who coined the term spiritual bypassing, described it as using spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep personal emotional work, to leap to the transcendent before the ordinary human material has been adequately worked through. And the ancient traditions, every genuine wisdom school that produced lasting fruit, were unanimous on this point. The inner work has two directions, not one. There is the upward movement, the recognition of the deeper self, the Ak, the Atman, the awareness beneath the construction, the spaciousness that opens when the center of gravity shifts from the constructed identity to the aware presence beneath it. This is real. This is essential. But there is also the downward movement, the movement into the unresolved, into the shadow, the unintegrated material. That has been placed in darkness, not because it is evil, but because it was too much to face at the time it was created. The grief that was never fully grieved, the anger that was never safely expressed, the fear that has been running as a background program for so long that it has become invisible, the relational patterns that repeat themselves regardless of how much spiritual insight you accumulate. These do not dissolve simply because the awareness behind them has been recognized. They require a different kind of attention, a more personal, more embodied, more directly human kind of attention. The willingness to sit with what is uncomfortable, not from the elevated perspective of someone who has recognized the deeper self, but from the ground level of someone who is simply human, who has wounds, who has patterns, who has places of genuine darkness, that the light of recognition has not yet reached. The Jungian tradition called this shadow work, the deliberate turning of attention toward what has been placed in darkness, not to wallow in it, not to be consumed by it, but to see it clearly, to bring it into the light of conscious awareness, because what is seen clearly loses its power to operate invisibly, cannot continue to run as an unconscious program once it has been consciously acknowledged. The Egyptian tradition built this understanding into the very structure of their cosmology. The descent into the Duat, the underworld, was not only the experience of the initiates in the stone chamber, it was the daily journey of the sun. Every night, Ra descended into the Duat, travelled through the darkness, encountered everything that lived in the depths, and emerged at dawn, renewed, not despite the descent. Because of it, the renewal required the darkness, required the willingness to go down before going up, required the full encounter with what lived in the depths before the return to the light. This is the map that the Egyptian tradition was offering, not a one-directional ascent toward the light, a complete circuit down into the depths, through what lives there and up again, transformed by the full journey, not just the half of it. That feels like progress. There is a quality of seeing that only becomes available after the shadow work has begun, not after it is complete. It is never complete, but after it has begun, after the willingness has arrived to look at what was placed in darkness, to sit with what was uncomfortable, to stop using the language of the deeper self as a way of avoiding the ordinary human material. That still requires attention. Something opens, not dramatically, a deepening of the quality of presence, a capacity to be with others. That was not available before, because you are no longer spending energy managing what has been placed in darkness, no longer defending against what you have not yet faced, no longer projecting onto others what you have not yet acknowledged in yourself. The energy that was going into the maintenance of the unexamined shadow becomes available for genuine contact, for genuine presence, for the kind of attention that actually reaches another person, rather than the attention that is always partially elsewhere. The ancient traditions understood this connection between inner work and outer relationship. They understood that the quality of your presence with another human being is directly proportional to the quality of your presence with yourself, that the parts of yourself you cannot face are the parts of others you cannot tolerate, that the compassion you are capable of is bounded by the compassion you have extended to your own darkness. This is not a comfortable teaching. It requires something that the spiritual bypass is specifically designed to avoid: the willingness to be ordinary, to be wounded, to be someone who has not figured it all out, who has genuine darkness, alongside the genuine light, who is not elevated above the human condition by virtue of their recognition, but more deeply immersed in it, more honest about it, more present with the full complexity of it. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." The seeing that the ancient traditions were pointing at does not produce an expert. It produces a beginner, someone who has seen enough to know that what they have seen is the beginning of an infinite depth, not the summit of a finite mountain. someone who approaches each moment, each relationship, each difficulty, with the freshness of someone who knows that they do not yet know what this moment contains, what this person carries, what this difficulty is asking of them. Now, I want to say something about what the seeing changes in how you relate to time, because one of the most consistent signs that the recognition is genuine and not a new performance is a shift in how urgency feels. The ordinary mind, operating from the constructed identity, lives in a state of continuous urgency. There is always something that needs to happen before things can be okay. Always a next step, a next achievement, a next resolution. That will finally deliver the sense of arrival. That has been just out of reach for as long as you can remember. This urgency is not caused by external circumstances. It is generated by the constructed identity itself. Because the constructed identity is fundamentally insecure, knows at some level that it is constructed, that it could be deconstructed, that its sense of worth depends on conditions holding. That might not hold, and so it drives, always forward, always toward the next thing. That will confirm its value. The seeing changes this, not by eliminating the practical necessities of life, not by making the future irrelevant, but by changing the relationship between the present moment and the future it is supposedly always preparing for. When the awareness beneath the construction has been genuinely recognized, even briefly, even imperfectly, the present moment stops being merely a means to a future end. It becomes what it actually is, the only place where life actually happens, the only place where the awareness that you actually are is actually present, not the past, not the future, here, now. There is a teaching from the Theravada Buddhist tradition that describes this shift with extraordinary precision. They call it sampajana, clear comprehension, the quality of knowing not just what you are doing, but why you are doing it. Not just where you are going, but whether the going itself is necessary. Not just what the next thing is, but whether the next thing is being approached with the full presence that it deserves. Sampajana is not a meditation technique. It is a quality of attention that can be brought to any activity. Washing dishes, walking to the car, listening to someone speak, preparing a meal. The most ordinary actions of an ordinary life. Approach with the full weight of awareness, not because ordinary actions are secretly sacred, but because the awareness that can be brought to them is the same awareness that the deepest meditation practices are trying to stabilize. And the seeing, when it is genuine, does not reserve itself for special occasions. It infiltrates the ordinary. It changes the texture of the Tuesday, not by making Tuesday feel extraordinary, by making Tuesday feel like Tuesday, fully, completely, without the overlay of somewhere else to be. This is what you are beginning to discover, and this shift from living toward the future to living in the present is not a small thing. It changes the texture of ordinary experience in ways that are difficult to describe, but immediately recognizable to anyone who has felt them. The meal tastes different, not because the food has changed, because you are actually here while eating it. The conversation lands differently, not because the other person has changed, because you are actually present with them. The walk feels different, not because the path has changed, because you are actually in your body, moving through the actual air of the actual day, rather than being somewhere else in your head while your body walks. This quality of presence, this being here, is not a spiritual achievement. It is the natural result of a consciousness that has stopped fleeing from the only moment it actually inhabits, the only moment that has ever existed, the only moment that will ever exist, now. Blocco 6, disinvolvimento, 5. So what does the seeing actually ask of you, practically, in the ordinary days, in the moments between the insights, in the weeks when nothing feels particularly awakened, and life is simply life, demanding and repetitive and ordinary, in the way that life always is? What does genuine seeing ask of you when the clarity is not present, when the spaciousness has contracted back into the familiar tightness, when the recognition that felt so real seems distant and theoretical, and the old patterns are running again? The ancient traditions had a consistent answer, not a dramatic one. Not the answer the part of us that wants transformation to be extraordinary would prefer. A simple one: show up, return, again. Not to a state, not to a peak experience, not to the particular quality of clarity that arrived unexpectedly and that you have been trying to recreate ever since. Return to the practice, whatever form the practice takes for you. The stillness in the morning, the honest attention turned inward, the willingness to notice what is actually here, rather than what you wish were here, the willingness to be present with the ordinary difficulty of an ordinary day, without reaching immediately for a spiritual framework. That makes the difficulty mean something elevated. Sometimes difficulty is just difficulty. Sometimes the ordinary is just ordinary. And the practice, the genuine practice, is to be present with that, without needing it to be more, without needing it to confirm that you are on the right path. The Benedictine tradition had a concept that I find more useful than almost anything from the more dramatic mystical traditions. They called it stabilitas, stability, the commitment to stay, to remain, to not abandon the practice. When it stops producing the results, that initially made it feel worthwhile to continue showing up, not because showing up always feels significant, but because the depth that genuine practice cultivates is built precisely in the moments when nothing remarkable seems to be happening, when the showing up feels routine, when the sitting feels like nothing more than sitting, when the returning feels like returning to the same ground you have stood on many times before. This ordinariness, this apparent lack of drama, is not evidence that nothing is happening. It is evidence that something real is happening, because real development, unlike performed development, does not require constant confirmation, does not need every session to produce insight, does not need every day to feel like progress. It simply continues quietly. At the pace that depth requires, which is rarely the pace the ego prefers. The second thing genuine seeing asks of you is honesty. Not the honesty of confession, not the performance of vulnerability. That has become its own kind of spiritual currency. The simple, unglamorous, daily honesty of noticing when you are not present, when you are performing rather than being, when you are using the language of the deeper self to avoid the work of the ordinary self, when the spiritual identity is functioning as a defense rather than a recognition. This kind of honesty does not make for inspiring content, does not produce the kind of clarity that feels worth sharing. It is quiet, private, entirely unspectacular. And it is the foundation of everything that is genuinely real in the inner life. The third thing genuine seeing asks is patience with yourself, not as a consolation, as a recognition that the depth you are beginning to touch is not fully available on demand, that the seeing comes and goes, that the clarity arrives and recedes, that the person you are becoming is not yet fully present and will not be for some time, and that this is not a problem. It is the condition of being human, of being genuinely in process, of taking the inner life seriously enough to allow it the time it actually requires, rather than the time that the part of you that wants to be finished would prefer. There is a phrase from the contemplative tradition that has stayed with me for years. It is not a famous phrase. It does not appear in the great mystical texts. It was said by an ordinary practitioner to a student who was frustrated with the slowness of their inner development. The student said, "I have been doing this for years. Why is nothing changing?" And the teacher said, "Everything is changing. You are just not watching the right things." The student was watching for dramatic shifts, for peak experiences, for the kind of visible transformation that would confirm to themselves and others that the practice was working. And the teacher was pointing at something else entirely, the slight increase in patience with the person who used to make you instantly reactive, the moment of noticing an old pattern before being completely consumed by it, the small increase in willingness to sit with what is uncomfortable, rather than immediately reaching for relief. These are not dramatic. They do not make for inspiring stories, but they are the actual substance of genuine inner development, and they accumulate quietly, invisibly, until one day you realize that the person you are is genuinely different from the person you were, not because anything dramatic happened, because you kept showing up every day to the same practice in the same ordinary life, and let the depth do what depth does when given sufficient time and sufficient honesty and sufficient willingness to stay. Bloco 7, CTA plus Desenvolvimento 6. If you have stayed with me this far, if something in what we have been exploring has named something you are living, I want to pause for a moment, not to interrupt what we are building, but to say something directly. This channel exists for exactly this kind of conversation, not for spiritual performance, not for content that makes the inner life sound more resolved than it actually is, for honest exploration of what it means to take the inner life seriously in the ordinary days, in the difficult ones, in the ones where nothing feels particularly awakened and life is simply life. If that is what you are here for, subscribe to Sacred Flame, because what we are building here, video by video, is something rare, a space where the genuine questions are welcome, where the difficulty of inner development is not bypassed before it has been fully inhabited, where the ancient wisdom is offered not as a set of answers, but as a map drawn by people who went through this themselves. And I want you present for what comes next, now, back to what is actually happening, because there is one more dimension of the seeing that I have not yet addressed, something that changes how you hold Eve. Right thing we have discussed. The seeing is not an achievement. I want to say that again because it is easy to hear everything we have explored tonight and conclude that the seeing is something to be attained, a destination to arrive at, a state to achieve and maintain. It is not. The seeing is a recognition, and recognition, by its very nature, is not something you can hold on to. It is something that happens when the conditions are right, when the ordinary noise drops low enough, when the constructed identity relaxes its grip, when the attention turns from what is being experienced toward what is doing the experiencing. And then it is simply present. Not because you achieved it, because it was always there. The obstacle was never the absence of the seeing. The obstacle was always the presence of what was obscuring it. And this distinction is everything, because it means that the practice, the genuine practice, is not the accumulation of insight. It is the removal of obstruction, not building something new, clearing something old, not becoming something different, recognizing what was always already here. The Zen tradition expresses this with characteristic economy. Before enlightenment, ordinary mind. After enlightenment, ordinary mind. Not a different mind, the same mind, seen clearly for what it actually is, the ordinary made transparent to the extraordinary that was always within it. This is not a comfortable teaching because it means that there is nowhere to arrive, no final state to achieve, no permanent elevation above the ordinary. Just this moment, this breath, this ordinary Tuesday, seen clearly or not, depending on the quality of attention brought to it, and the practice is simply to bring that quality of attention again and again to the same ordinary life, the same relationships, the same difficulties, the same body, the same breath, until the ordinary becomes what it always was, the only place where what you are looking for was ever actually present. I want to leave you with something simple, not a framework, not a map, not another layer of understanding to add to everything we have explored tonight. Something more immediate than any of those, right now, in this moment, before you do anything with what you have heard, before you decide what it means, or how it applies, or what you are going to do differently. Just notice that you are here, that something is present, that the awareness receiving these words has been present through this entire conversation, through everything we have explored, through the moments that landed and the moments that did not, through the recognition and the resistance, through all of it, simply here. That awareness is what is finally seeing, not a new version of you, not an improved or awakened or more spiritual version. The same awareness that has been here all along, looking at itself with a clarity it did not previously have, not because it has achieved something, because something that was obscuring it has become slightly more transparent. And in that transparency, something recognizes itself, not for the first time, for what feels like the first time in a long time. Maybe the first time in this particular life, but not for the first time ever, because this recognition, the ancient traditions were unanimous about this, is not new. It is the oldest thing there is, older than any tradition that points at it, older than any language that tries to describe it, older than the human beings who have been pointing at it for as long as human beings have been capable of pointing at anything. What you are finally seeing, was always here, was always you, was never absent, never lost, never in need of being created or achieved or earned, only recognized. And the recognition, as you are discovering, is not a destination. It is a direction you can take in any moment, in any ordinary Tuesday, in any difficult conversation, in any moment of grief or confusion, or the simple quiet of being alive. The direction is always the same, not outward, inward, toward the awareness that is looking, toward the presence that has been here, through everything, toward what you are. When you stop performing what you are, that is what is finally seeing, and it does not need your help to continue. It only needs your willingness to stop looking away, to stop filling every silence with something that prevents the silence from speaking, to stop reaching for the next framework, the next understanding, the next spiritual content, before you have fully inhabited what this moment is already offering. The seeing is here. It has always been here, in the space between thoughts, in the pause before the next thing begins, in the awareness that is present, before you decide what to do with it. That is the seeing. That is what is finally becoming clear, not as a concept, as a lived reality in this body, in this life, in this unrepeatable moment of being exactly who you are, with exactly the history you carry, with exactly the wounds that have not yet fully healed, with exactly the questions that do not yet have answers, with exactly the love and the grief and the ordinary human complexity that makes you precisely, irreplaceably you. The seeing does not require you to be different. It only requires you to look clearly at what is already here, and what is already here has always been enough, has always been more than enough, has always been everything. If something in this conversation reached you, if something finally named what you have been living without words for, share this with 5 people, not to promote a channel, but because somewhere in your life there is someone who is beginning to see, who is frightened by what the seeing reveals, who does not yet have a framework for what is happening to them. Give them this and leave a comment below. Tell me what you are finally seeing, not what you think you should be seeing, what is actually becoming clear, what has shifted, what you cannot go back from, and if there is something this conversation has opened, a question that is now more alive than it was before. Leave it there, because that question is the seeing continuing to deepen. Subscribe to Sacred Flame, because the seeing does not end here. It only begins, and we are only just starting to look together.